Okay, this ought to work. So Wayne's going to open the window to stick the aperture in there. In that aperture, I should say. Sticking it's the exhaust fan, yeah. And then you close it down to get it nice and tight. Now he's going to open the top up so that we can mess around with the inside. You see the inside works, but we'll come back to this in a little bit. And now we want to set up the computer. Okay, Wayne's going to hook up the computer to the device here.
Do we get power?
He's hooking the USB into a USB port on the computer. Now he's powering up. Hold that button down for 3 seconds. And you see both the blue light and the red light come on solid. We should be good to go. Okay, we're going to bring up laser Gerbil here and open that up full screen. And now we're going to open a file. So I go up here to the file menu, I click on open the file. Now remember, you're supposed to bring a file with you to the class, so make sure you've got one copied. I'm going to open Charlie Brown B&W. And what pops up is a window called Import Raster Image. And that shows exactly what, well, or at least roughly what our image is going to look like. You got a lot of different parameters here you can play with, and I'm not really going to go through all these. There's not a great deal of difference it'll make. The conversion tools, however, are quite important. There are a bunch of these. There's line-to-line tracing, which we use in probably 90% of what we do. You can also do what's called dithering, which actually looks pretty nice with Charlie Brown here. The dithering looks pretty good. We could vectorize Charlie Brown, which means basically what we're seeing is exactly the outline of what's going to get engraved. And we can do center line, which again just kind of picks up the center of any black areas. And we can do pass-through, which is exactly like the image that we presented. But I'm going to go back to line-by-line tracing because that's pretty easy to use. I'm going there are several options here. You can trace that image from left to right, that's horizontal, or up and down, that's vertical. Or you could also trace it diagonally. I'm going to use horizontal. The quality, the more lines per millimeter you have, the kind of darker and more resolution you get. And so I'm going to leave it here at 12, but you can play with that. Now, in addition to that, there are several other nice features here in this window. Down here at the bottom, you see when I rolled over this icon down here, it says rotate by 90 degrees. Now, I don't really want Charlie Brown rotated that way, so I'll go back and this will say revert all changes. That brings them back to the original. But you can rotate them first one way, then the other. You can flip him if you like him going that way, or flip him back. You can flip him left to right. A lot of things you can play with. You can crop the image, or you can do what's called auto trim the image. And I really like auto trim because what it allows you to do is, as you'll see in a second, is you take this image, you click on it, and what it gives you is exactly the rectangle that's going to be engraved on the grid. So this cuts out any extra white space. Now, of course, it doesn't cut out the white space that's within that rectangle, but it does just give you that rectangle, and that's important for layout later. Once we've set the whatever parameters, we have the conversion tool set, we've done any editing we want to do, then we hit the next button. And next brings up another screen called target image. Now here, there are several options. Basically, you can change the engraving speed anywhere up to, in theory, 10,000 millimeters per minute. That's very fast. You see this is set at 1,000 because that's kind of normally what I would do things at, or 1,500 or so. Another thing you can set is the power. This S-min is the power of that you want the laser to engrave white pixels at, and nominally that's 0. So you don't want to see anything that's white to be engraved. S max is, as it's currently set, it's set at 80% of the maximum power of the laser. That means that a truly black pixel will come out, will be fired at 80%. Now I can change that to 60%. Now you notice here I'm typing a third digit because somehow they gave us an extra decimal place to work with. So I changed that to 60%. It won't fire quite with the same intensity. So that's something you can play with. Now, if you want to use the Laser Gerbil database, you see there's this little icon over here of a book. You open that and it opens their database. You have to first of all select the laser model we have, which in our case is the Ortur LU 20 watt. It's that guy. And then we next select the material we've got. Well, I'm going to try to put him on a piece of plywood. So I'm going to engrave him on a piece of plywood. In theory, I could also cut through the plywood, but it could only be 1.5 millimeters thick. That's about a 1/16 of an inch, or 3 millimeters, which is about 1/8 of an inch. So I'm not going to cut him. I'm going to engrave him. And you'll notice this tells me that what this suggests, use the power of 80% at 3,000 millimeters per minute and make just one pass. And because I don't care too much, I'm going to accept this. I'm going to accept what they're telling me. And so if I apply this, then you'll notice is what this did was it comes back up to my target image. It puts 3,000 millimeters per minute as the engraving speed and 80% or 800 as the maximum. Okay, so far so good. So I have set this up. Now you can use, I would say, engraving speeds from anywhere from 1,500 to 3,000 or so for most wood, and you can use powers from maybe 60% up to 80%, again for most wood, and it kind of depends on the wood you're using. The darker the wood, the more energy it absorbs, and so you might want to use a slightly lower power on a dark wood, a slightly higher power on a light wood. Also, the intensity, if you engrave at 1,500 millimeters per minute, you're only going half as fast. That means you're applying the energy at much more, a lot longer. Yeah, you're applying the energy longer, so you're doing more intensity. So if you reduce the speed, you actually increase the amount of intensity. Clearly, if you increase the power, you increase the intensity as well. That's a little more clear. But the speed, it works in the opposite way. Okay, now the next thing I look at, I come back here to the size and the offset. Now for size, the first thing I'll do with anything I'm going to do is I want to see what the size is that I've imported. And this one is actually 74 by 131.7 millimeters. That's, well, 74 millimeters is about 3 inches by about 4 or 5, 4 inches. So this is a big image, and I don't think I want to engrave anything quite that big. This is actually the size that my paint program brought this in at. And at 300 dots per inch, it would engrave this at that size with that resolution. Now, one of the ways of changing this is to leave this auto size on and, let's say, increase the resolution up to 600 dots per inch. And what that does is, you notice that changes the size by half. So you're going to have now a much smaller object at a much smaller size. In most cases, you don't have that much flexibility. You want to work with you've got a piece of work that you want to do, and it has a certain size. Okay, we got our piece of wood here that we want to work with, And I'm going to measure the size of that piece, or at least determine the size. How big do you think we want that image to be on that piece, Wayne?
Well, this is 5 inches by about 5.5.
Okay, I only want it maybe half that big.
Yeah.
So probably so at this point, we're gonna make this thing, since the piece of wood is 5 by 5.5, we're gonna make it only like 2 inches wide. I don't want it that big a piece. So I'm gonna make it 2 inches wide. And notice here, if I change the width to 2, it automatically, or not, I did it wrong. It's 2 millimeters. I don't want it 2 millimeters wide. If I want something 2 inches wide, I got to multiply by 25.4. So let's make it, 2 inches would be about 58.8. 58.8. Whoops, the point didn't come out. There we are. 58.8 millimeters by 104.5 millimeters. So that's the size I wanted. Actually, when I spoke earlier about the size, that was all in millimeters, so it really wasn't that far off of what I actually want to go for here. But let's do this at 58.8 by 104.5. Okay. Now the next thing we got to do is this offset, and to do this, I'm going to have to show you a little bit more on the laser machine. Okay, I'm looking at my laser now, and I'm looking at it from above the control panel, and looking at the width of the laser. And what you'll notice here on this is that. It's a little hard to see. You see you have numbers written along the frame, or Wayne's pointing to them, along that frame. What Wayne's pointing to, what I would call the horizontal frame or horizontal axis is the x-axis, and the y-axis over here is the vertical axis. Now, you'll notice that on our base, we have a bunch of lines drawn. We've got vertical lines and horizontal lines. The vertical lines, along the vertical lines, the x values are all the same, all the way back. And along the horizontal lines, they're also the same. And so what we want to do is get used to seeing where on here we're going to place our piece. So go ahead, Wayne, you can put that piece in here somewhere. Now, before we do much of anything else, I'm going to ask Wayne, why don't you draw a pencil
where you
mark
want the lower left-hand corner
of the picture to be? You want the lower left-hand corner right there. Okay, so he's putting a mark. He put a mark at a place, and so that's an important point. Now what Wayne's going to do is he's going to kind of position this mark in a convenient place. And then he's going to use the straight edge to see where that mark hits the x-axis. Where do you think that x is?
You see 18?
Okay, so that'd be 180 millimeters. And it's only got to be fairly rough. It doesn't have to be exact. And where it hits the y-axis over here?
14.
So 140 millimeters.
Okay.
That's going to be our offset. In other words, that's going to be where our drawing is going to begin. Okay, now we're back at our computer, and now we're setting the offset at 180 X and 140 Y. Basically, this only has to be convenient to how your piece fits within the space available for engraving, and then of course where you want your picture to be drawn. And so understand, we're working with the lower left-hand corner, and the offset then tells us where our picture is going to begin to be drawn. Now, if we're happy with everything as it's set up, we hit create. The computer does a little bit of thinking, in this case very little, and it brings Charlie Brown back up. Now there's a couple things you notice on this picture right now. With Charlie, first of all, he appears up here in the kind of middle of the image. You see red, and that's exactly where the laser is going to burn, in those places where you see red. You see also a blue dotted line with a plus down here. And that shows where the laser currently is. It shows the path where the laser is going to come up and where it's going to start to burn. You also have these two, there's a couple of faint horizontal lines. This one reads 180. This one reads 239. In other words, those show the X limits of where our laser is going to burn. And on the horizontal, you have two horizontal lines. One comes over to 140, the other one up to 244. So the lines are going to be generated up to 200, Y equals 244 millimeters. So that's really our setup for burning. Now, essentially, we're ready to burn, almost. Okay, now we're going to start with our engraving. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to shut the machine off again. And I'm going to ask Wayne to, first of all, set the focus. And so Wayne's going to use this little shim. Go ahead and put that down somewhere where we're going to engrave. And then he's got this, you see there's a little screw on the side. And he has to raise and lower, whoops, the cover came off. That's,
yeah, I see it.
The cover's got to be on there.
There's little magnets on it.
Yeah, little magnets hold it. And he's lowering that down to where it's touching the shim, and then good. That's good. And now, I don't know if you moved it, Wayne, that doesn't matter too much.
No.
Don't worry about it yet, because what we're going to do is I'm going to come back here and just touch the power button again, and it comes back to home. Now, at this point, you might want to recheck where your mark is. It should be at, remember, 180 on X. So you may have jiggled that a little bit, and then on 140 on Y. And the other thing is, you can use the also the grid to make sure that your board is in there square. Or however you want to orient it, so it's oriented right. Now, once that's done, now Wayne, why don't you go ahead and take that. Take the cover, the shield off. We don't do much burning or much work without that shield on there, but for purposes of setting up the piece, we'll use that shield. Now at this point, okay, I'm now back at the screen. I had turned the machine off, and when I did that, I have to reconnect now. And again, you hear the ding where everything is set up. And now, there are several things on here that are helpful to us, several buttons along the bottom. And let me kind of go through them. The center button is sort of helpful if you want to find exactly the center of where your drawing would be. And sometimes that's a useful thing to mark if you're making something really where you want the center to be lined up exactly right. If you push that, then the laser will go right to the center. I'm not going to do that now. What I am going to do is, in a moment, is use the corner button, which that takes us to the lower left-hand corner of our drawing. Remember, that's this point up here that we set the offset on the drawing, and we also put the mark on our piece of wood. So we're going to line those guys up, and then we're going to use the frame button, which will walk us around the boundary of our drawing. So we can see that the size is right, it's what we thought we were going to get, and it's laid out right on the piece of wood. And finally, there's this blink which actually what that does is that just fires the laser just for a fraction of a second, but it allows you to see if you're lined up right, especially with this corner point. So we're going to do that. We're going to do each of those things. I'm going to ask Wayne to put on the glasses, and I'm going to both press the buttons as well as take the video to show you what's going on. Okay, so now we're ready, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to find a corner, we think. Yeah. There we are. We're going to go to the corner. Okay, now we're going to blink. Whoa, are we on the corner, Wayne?
Right there.
We're right there?
Perfect.
I mean, boy, even a blind pig gets an acorn, right?
Well, I tell you, we lucked out.
We lucked out there. That doesn't always happen, but you see, if it's not right on the corner, you could blink again.
You move it.
You can move it.
That's perfect.
You know, whatever you want to do, but that was perfect. Now we're going to show you, I'm going to do the frame button and show you exactly what frame does. Frame is actually using the laser at pretty low power, but it's walking around where that image is going to be.
That's all right.
It's
We don't care.
yeah, on this particular thing we don't care that much. You know, it's
Not centered.
it's not exactly centered. It's not perfect, but
We don't care.
we're, as you say, we're not building a church.
No.
Make sure you put that on with the magnets up and with that indented part toward the back, or I guess that's the increasing vertical direction.
Closer to the fan.
Okay, and speaking of the fan, we got a little switch over here that basically, I don't think the fan's running.
Not plugged in.
It's not plugged in.
Oh, it is.
Oh, there it goes.
wasn't plugged
It
in.
wasn't plugged in, but that's our fan. You can just hear it slightly. It's drawing a bit. Okay, so now we know we're set up for engraving. It's time to close the lid. For safety's sake, we close the lid. We close the lid. And now back to our screen. Everything is hooked up okay, and we know we're good to go. So in fact, we're going to just press this green button here. When I do that, you see the laser moves up and starts engraving. Now there's a bunch of things to notice here on this screen while this is going on. Down here in the lower left, it tells us that this is going to take about 7.5 minutes. Okay, it's a pretty good size piece, so that's not surprising. Up here where it says progress, it has progressed for 28 seconds. In other words, that keeps track of our elapsed time while we're engraving. There is a stop button right here. There's also a stop button down here. So I mean, there's a couple different ways to stop the engraving if you need that to happen. You'll also notice that, of course, the blue cross is flipping back and forth across our image, and it's showing the progress of our burn. Up here, you see a bunch of information about where the X's and Y's are, and also some things about the strength of the engraving and how much focus there is. So that's interesting. And in this window, there's all kinds of, these are the actual G commands, the Gerbil commands that laser Gerbil generates. And so you can see how that's going. Now it's going a little more slowly now because we're in this black area, so it's doing an awful lot of burning right in here. Yeah, and the time, the estimated time has changed. You can't bank too much on that estimated time. One of the things that we ask is that as you do this, you hang around in the complete off chance that there's any kind of fire. Well, what will happen is that there's a fire detector on our machine. It's covered in blue tape, but it detects a light and changes in light anyway, so we believe it will work. And that fire detector would go off. That will automatically stop the engraving, and it will set off an alarm. So if that happens, usually you're kind of buggered, and you know that.
Sandpaper.
Sandpaper, yeah, we sand it off and start over again. That doesn't happen very often.
That's why it's always a good idea to start with a piece of scrap wood, hopefully the same type of wood, to see exactly what the burn's gonna look like.
Well said, well said. So we want to always do a piece of scrap. So you know, I don't do my first Charlie Brown on a piece of Brazilian mahogany or something like that. You know, that cost me $50. So in any event, let's sit back and let this go. Okay, I think we're in the home stretch here. We're about done with Charlie. Ding! So now the laser returns. You heard the ding. Off it goes. Let's take a look. Hey, Charlie looks perfect. Very, very clean definition. He went exactly where we wanted him to, although he's not centered. He's not. Maybe we did a bad choice of our location, but nonetheless, he's exactly where we wanted him to, and we would go home and say this is good. Now, of course, at this point, maybe you're not happy with your job. If you're not happy with your job, let me show you something else that you have to do. Maybe it came out too light. Well, what you could do, if it was too light, I'm not going to do this, but you come back and you hit this green button right here, and it'll make another pass. If you don't move it, don't touch it, don't move it, and it'll make another pass exactly over, and of course darken up what you've got. We don't want to do that. If it's too dark, too bad. Sand it off or live with it. I mean, that's where you have to be careful setting things up. If it's maybe you don't like this. Let's suppose this is your test piece, and you say, "Oh gosh, that is too dark." Now, before I do it on my piece of Brazilian mahogany, I'm going to change some things. I didn't want it quite that dark, so you go down here to your File menu, and you click on Reload Last File. Now, you don't have to redo much of anything, because Charlie comes in exactly as we had him before. It was exactly the last file. Hit Next. Our target image comes up, and I say, what am I going to do? He's too dark, so I'm going to change my engraving speed, or I'm going to change my power. Okay, maybe I'll change my power down to 65%. Set it at 650. That's all you need to do. You know, change one thing, change two things. Don't change the size, don't change the offset unless you really think you screwed up. Now you could set your piece of Brazilian mahogany with the little mark on it exactly where you want Charlie to be, and you've got the same offset, so use those dimensions again, and you know how to go with that. All you have to do is hit Create, and now it puts Charlie back up there. Notice we did this at a little less power. It's only going to take 6 minutes. You cut the power, it also cuts the time down, interestingly enough. So, and I'm not exactly sure I understand why that is. But, so that's it. So, you know, it's easy to get your project. Now, if this is your final project, you just hit the green Go button, and bingo, you've got your project done. Okay, there's problems. Every now and then problems come up. Wayne and I have both had problems. I think our number one problem is the stupid fire detector light going off, although it didn't go off this time. but when we open the top of the cabinet, the fire detector light sometimes goes off. If you're done with your job, it's really no problem, because all you do is you go through, you come back, reset the alarm button, reset the machine, turn the power back on, and everything's good to go. If, on the other hand, if that goes off in the middle of a job, you could be screwed. Sometimes it will allow you to continue, but not always. Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that Wayne mentioned here, be very careful. Do not bump the table while it's engraving, because that's another thing that will set the alarm off and stop the machine. So don't even lean on the table while it's engraving, and don't let anybody else be near it. Another problem we have that occasionally happens, if you have a really long engraving, let's say something that takes an hour, and you're using your computer, the power settings on your computer may be such that your computer goes to sleep after 20 minutes. If that happens, it'll kill the project, because if that happens, the computer's going to stop. It won't feed anything, and bang, the machine will shut down, and you'll have an alarm. Another thing that can happen, so let me, first of all, the power settings. If you're using your machine, if it's a long project, make sure you change your sleep and power settings to be really long, to allow for that. Another problem that Wayne mentioned, and we've seen this on trying to engrave metal at times, although we're really kind of just giving instructions for engraving wood, but in theory you can engrave metal and other objects where you use a real high power, maybe something like 100% at a fairly low speed. What happens is the laser itself will heat up, and you'll get an error message that says the laser's hot. And what actually happens in that case is that this little stop sign here will flash and shut the machine off until it cools off, and then you can start it again. And I believe you start it by pressing this little guy, or I think. Okay, now we're looking at shutting everything down. When you're done, you come back here. What are you going to shut down first, Wayne?
I turn the machine off.
Yeah, good. Just hit that reset button and that turns it off. Now you probably want to unhook the USB plug from, unhook the USB plug.
Turn the fan off.
Turn the fan off. There we go. Close the lid, keep the dirt out, and put the window back the way it was. Remove that sheet, pull down, and most importantly, lock the window so that burglars can't steal our stuff. Hey, it's been fun. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention, make sure you lock this, keep this door locked. You don't want somebody walking in on you when you're engraving, because that also sets the alarm off.